An Oklahoma City police officer was arrested over the weekend, charged with 5 different counts related to serious violent crimes. Now he's made his first court appearance and he's out on bail. We're going to break down these accusations against this officer with trial attorney Jennifer El-Kadi. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Oklahoma City K-9 officer Ryan Stark is finding himself on the wrong side of the law as he's been charged with kidnapping, domestic assault and battery by strangulation, domestic assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, first-degree rape, and threatening an act of violence. According to court documents, a woman claims that after going out to dinner with Stark, this is someone he had previously been in a relationship with, she claims when they left the restaurant, things started to go bad for her. She then goes into detail about what she says Stark did to her that led to him being charged. She said it was like a demon had taken over Stark. He's on paid administrative leave, by the way, as investigators from another department continue to look into this really disturbing case. And here today to talk more about it is trial attorney Jennifer El-Kadi, who has a specialization in sex crimes cases. Jenny, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. First, let me ask you, is the process of charging a member of law enforcement different in any way?
It is a lot different. Unfortunately, when you're charging a police officer or any type of government entity, what ends up happening is the charge itself is going to be a lot more difficult to prove because there are additional protections that are awarded to specifically also police departments.
And speaking of which, by the way, the Oklahoma City Police Department told local media that they couldn't comment on an investigation that wasn't their own, but they did confirm that Stark is on administrative leave. Mark Nelson, the president of the Oklahoma City Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 123, said in a statement, when criminal charges are filed against an officer, specifically non-duty related charges, the department will initiate the process of placing the officer on administrative leave without pay. These accusations and charges are very serious, and we are sure they will be investigated fully. We respect the due process of all involved, and we'll wait to see what comes off the investigation. Jenny, real quick, is there a chance that the outcomes of that investigation and the criminal investigation, the actual criminal case against him, that they could be different? And what I mean by that is, could the internal investigation said he did nothing wrong, and yet he could be found guilty of the charges that he's facing, or does that not usually happen? It's pretty consistent.
It's usually pretty consistent. It also would be the question that I would probably pose to is the type of evidence that the police department would have at their hands with respect to internal. So, does this man have a history of sex abuse or crimes of dishonesty, anything that would go to his character attestation that could potentially put him at risk? But if they don't have that information at their fingertips, their internal investigation might be very different. There might be a history that he's a great person and that they didn't know any of these issues coming to light, but then you have the criminal case that could show absolutely that this has been an issue.
Let's get into some of these allegations. So according to the court documents, this woman says that Mr. Stark picked her up in his Oklahoma City Police Department vehicle. So keep that in mind. He was allegedly in his trooper vehicle. She called a friend to come get her from the restaurant because she didn't want to go back to Stark's home in nearby Blanchard. And in the affidavit, Detective Jennifer Self wrote, she advised he then started to get mad and he started to amp up and was intoxicated. Ryan then disclosed about sleeping with other women, including who Ryan often buys drugs from. So the woman, she ends up getting into the patrol car, but she told the detective that she tried to get out of the car to run away when they were getting close to his home. The affidavit says, when opening the passenger door to get out, Ryan then accelerated the vehicle. Her foot was already out. It was slammed into the garage. That he knew her foot was broken, that her toes were dislocated. Ryan then took her phone, keeping her from being able to get help. Ryan then pushed her on her broken foot while she was begging for him to get her medical attention. Now, according to the victim's statement, Stark kept her inside the home for hours. He allegedly choked her, squeezed her, spat in her face, spat gum in her hair, and rubbed the gum in. Ryan then threatened to kill her several times. And while Ryan had her on the floor, he put his gun to her head and in her mouth, telling her, I should blow your head off, expletive head off. And also, again, it was reported that he squeezed her foot to inflict more pain. So we're talking about some pretty sadistic allegations here. And to make matters even worse, Stark also allegedly raped this victim repeatedly. The detective noted that the victim's bruises and physical injuries at the time of the interview. She filed a police report from the hospital on Friday, telling police that Stark allowed her to leave after 8 hours in his home, only after she agreed to everything being okay. Wow, Jenny, that's absolutely horrific allegations there. I don't even, what's your initial reaction to that?
I mean, even just taking notes as to what it is that you were saying, I think the first thing that you really hit on that is very important to retouch on is that he picked her up in a trooper vehicle. And that is really important because the fact of the matter is people who are in a position of authority, it also tends to scare individuals away because you're terrified as to what the outcome could potentially be if you were to speak up about these issues, these accusations, whatever it may be. The next is that while you mentioned that he was intoxicated, it wouldn't be a viable defense here, or it might be considering his past, any prior acts of dishonesty or prior criminal history that he could have had. But it is something to notate. But the allegations are so serious, and the aggression as to how it played out towards is just so. It's just awful to think about. And also having that the friend she did contact a friend is also important because then you have another witness statement.
Hey guys, we're going to get you back to this disturbing story in a minute, but I want to thank one of our sponsors who helps make this show possible, Upside. So Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, dining. Now, believe it or not, I do know how to pump my own gas. I don't know if that was like a mystery or not, but I do. And when I do, why not use Upside, right? Because I could get cash back when I fill up my tank. And yes, this is actual real cash back. There's no confusing rewards or points or credits, none of that. Just actual money you can transfer straight to your bank account. So once you have the app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card, and you follow the steps in the app and you get paid. Now, as you just saw me do, you can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, Sunoco, restaurants like Chipotle, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, Domino's, KFC, Taco Bell, and that's just to name a few. So right now, to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code SIDEBAR for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. How difficult is it getting information from a victim in these kinds of cases? Because a lot of these cases are based on their account.
Absolutely. And I think something that is tragic with society as of lately and with specifically attorneys is that you see that sometimes there's a lot of victim blaming as to the person who is coming out, but also too, there's something to be said. Sometimes people will say, well, testimony isn't enough, right? Just her word is not enough. You need evidence. Well, in fact, testimony is evidence. That is evidence in and of itself. So testimony is very important pieces of evidence. So I think it's also difficult because you have that mindset that the testimony is not enough, but it is. And having the ability also to come forward, victims are very, very terrified of what the potential outcome could be, whether or not they're going to be believed, especially with situations like police. Police in and of itself is very difficult because you're going up against something that is going to be highly protected, more than likely.
How do you defend yourself from this? How does Stark defend himself from these allegations?
I think it's going to be what his past acts, if there were any. If he had nothing, this is the first time that something like this has happened. That might be a defense. But the reality of the situation is that although it might be a defense, it could just be that he would be charged of lesser crimes, that this is like a first round of something being charged for him. If it was a continuous pattern, obviously it would have been probably higher charges, but that could be one defense mechanism.
And look, his title as a member of law enforcement is that, help him in the minds of the jury, maybe, but in light of these allegations, there's only so much that could help. I mean, it's not, let me be clear, him being a member of law enforcement doesn't grant him immunity from being charged for this. It's just the idea of, can you believe a member of law enforcement would do this, or is she making this up? But the injuries are key there too. Now, there was an emergency protective order that was approved by the judge over the weekend He was arrested on Saturday. He was booked into the McLean County Jail around noon, and then he was transferred to the Grady County Jail for his protection. And as we mentioned, Stark went before a judge on Monday, and that judge set his bond at $200,000, which Stark posted within minutes of being in the courtroom. The judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, and he was ordered to surrender any weapons. He was forbidden from having contact with the victim. He's next expected in court on July 24th. Jenny, talk to us about what the protection order is in this case and how it works.
Generally speaking, what a protective order does is it's going to protect the victim. In some situations, it could be that you could proceed under pseudonym, so you don't want your name to be disclosed from public docket records. Now, with respect to trial, the name can be disclosed to the jury, but the protective order is really just to help ensure that the identity of the victim is protected, that they themselves are protected from any danger, any potential repercussions that could come out of this, and it really is just to protect the victim and their identity in these situations.
And by the way, you mentioned his background, right? Like what he did in the past. It's interesting to note that he, Mr. Stark, actually made headlines nationwide around 10 years ago, but for a very, very different reason. So in 2014, Stark and other officers responded to a burglary in southeast Oklahoma City, and the suspect led police on a chase, but eventually the canine Kai took down the suspect, but the suspect stabbed the dog repeatedly and the dog died. So sad. Stark, he was the Kai's handler. He shot the suspect 6 times, but again, Kai died after complications from surgery. He was given a hero's funeral, by the way, and the Cleveland County District Attorney at the time, Greg Mashburn, sent a letter to the Oklahoma City Police Department stating that the use of force by Sergeant Ryan Stark was justified, it was appropriate under the law. And a few months later, Stark was back on active duty. He had a new canine partner, Kane. Really sad to think about that. But Jenny, just to be clear about something, when you have an officer who is accused, not of corruption, not of fabricating evidence like that, but when you have an officer who's accused of wrongdoing, criminal charges, does that in any way affect any of his old cases?
It actually does. So typically what ends up happening is when there is an open investigation against a police officer, what they will tend to do, and it does vary by state, but typically what is typically done is that they will go back and reopen some investigations that were done by that police officer just to ensure that they've dotted all their I's, crossed all their T's, ensuring that there's no additional issues that could be presented, especially if somebody like a police officer is going to end up in jail.
Disturbing case, disturbing allegations, just really sad to see. Jenny El-Kadi, thanks so much for coming on and breaking it down for us. We really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you, Jesse.
You got it. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.